What up? T-Bob here.
And Jake as well.
And look at you. You done stumbled upon little OTB Saints, where we bring you all the latest black and gold coverage.
Who are the Saints going to draft? Who's going to be their quarterback? What does the salary cap look like? All that information and more.
Hope you enjoy it. Like, subscribe. All right, so Wardrobe, this is going to be a bit long here. And I feel like we need to read it and engage with it at its own points, because he came out here and had a long tweet about the Saints cap strategy. And I read it and I was really like, that's, not like, it sounds very right on a lot of perspectives. And then you look at the mentions and it's a lot of Saints fans and analysts and others being like, you're an idiot. Like, this is not true. So I figured, let's bring it on air and let's just kind of put it on the table, expose it, and see what we think. Warren Sharp, quote, a different spin on the Saints cap. The NFC South is a largely incompetent division. The worst win rate of any division the last 2 years, second worst of the last 3 years. Yet, the Saints cannot achieve their goals and even make the playoffs largely because of their approach off the field. In 2022, they paid almost $28 million in dead cap. That's 14% of the cap to guys not even on the team, like Teron Armstead, Drew Brees, Malcolm Jenkins. Those were all guys they restructured in prior years to save them, but would cost them into 2022. In 2023, they still had a $4 million cap hit for Malcolm Jenkins, who retired 2 years prior. Nearly the same cap hit as Tyrann Mathieu. In 2023, they had a total of $22 million in dead cap money. That's 10% of the cap. Once again, two guys not even on the team, like David Onyemata, Marcus Davenport, and Malcolm Jenkins, all of which they restructured. Maybe they make the playoffs if they're not wasting 10% of the cap on guys not on the roster, thanks to their ideas of kicking the can down the road. Now, let's stop there for a second and kind of absorb that. Immediate thoughts when you hear Sharp lay that out.
I think the 10% right at the very end when you said that, that's really where the light bulb went on for me, because there's something to that. Championship teams, the back end of their roster from 47 to 53, a lot of times who you have there can potentially be the difference in a championship or not.
That was like an old Parcells thing. Wasn't
Yes.
it something about like, the 53rd, like why are you always working guys out? He's like, well, at some point, the 53rd guy will like be the deciding point in a game. And I want to make sure that I have my best possible guy when that point comes.
Yeah, and like you look at the Chiefs team, and like look at some of the guys that stepped up for the Chiefs late in the regular season, in the playoffs. They were guys that were at the very back end of that roster. And so we're talking about 10%. That 10% can be crucial because it either means, you can take a flyer maybe
14% 2 years ago. 14 and then 10.
You
So
can you can take flyers on some veteran guys that can potentially help you down the stretch, and if you don't have that 10%, then you're on all league minimum deals. You're on all probably undrafted free agent rookies, and that's where you're at. And we could look at teams that have won the Super Bowl and that 10 to 14%, whatever it is, on the back end of the roster. And maybe you expand that. Maybe it goes from player 40 to 53. Like, just imagine if you can have like a veteran player, a veteran 5-year linebacker that you have to play in the postseason, or would you rather have an undrafted free agent rookie because you're so strapped against the cap that you don't have the ability to do so? And so, like, championships are won in the back end of your roster. Front end talent, absolutely. You have to have it to be to that point. But it's the back end of that roster where the best teams that I was a part of, that's where really you made your hay.
That's really interesting, because a lot of the counter argument from Saints fans appears to be naming the player that we didn't get, that we wanted because of the cap, which is not unfair, though I would say, guys like Trey Hendrickson, like that was a cap casualty. You couldn't afford to keep him. Marcus Bell, Von Bell, cap casualty, couldn't afford to keep him. But even that though is a bit odd, because maybe you could have, if not for the pandemic, because remember the Saints' entire strategy is based off of, okay, the cap will go up, and so we can allot basically that increase to be dead money to retain the roster that we want to right now and be as competitive as we want right now. But when it went down during the pandemic, that really screwed up kind of the long-term plans, right? And so you end up losing a couple guys that you would have kept. So even if you want to take them out because of the pandemic, like, I understand the point that, well, yeah, name me a player that they wanted they haven't gotten. That's fair. But to Jake's point, that's not what actually decides, when you're trying to fight into the playoffs and the margins matter so much. And in a sport where people are doing anything they can to gain the smallest percentage points of advantages, is it actually good? Even if you can make the math work and field good starters, is it actually good to have a tenth of your resources being given every single year to players that aren't playing anymore?
It's tough, and you don't know the player because they didn't have the ability to sign the player. So you never heard the rumor because they knew they didn't have the ability to go get the player. And the Saints, they find a way always under the cap. We know that, but if you just continue to do this and over and over again, is there going to be a number where it gets to? Maybe it's not 14%, maybe it's 19%, maybe it's 22%, and then that potentially could just take you from a team that's fighting for the playoffs every year to a team that wins 4 games.
I mean, yeah, if you're going to 20% cap, that's untenable to me. In fact, I think they hit that number once during that 7-9 stretch with Peyton before they got it going. Now, that said, the other part about this is how much would having like a Drew Brees level of quarterback make up for all of this, right? Because you had all these same kind of dead cap numbers in that 17-21 run when you were kicking ass, only you had a Hall of Fame quarterback operating, right? So this is very nuanced. Okay, let's keep reading the tweet. He says, in 2024, there are 187 players with cap hits of $12 million or more. 11 of the 187 are on the Saints. That is the most in the NFL. That is double the average in the NFL. They have 6 players hitting the cap in 24 for $14 million or more. All 6 were restructured in the last calendar year to help with their 23 cap hit while hurting their 24 cap. Guys like Ryan Ramczyk, Cam Jordan, Alvin Kamara, Demario Davis, Taysom Hill. That's interesting to note because those are all names where you're kind of like, what does their, where's their future lie with the team? Not Demario Davis, obviously. I would say Taysom Hill still in great standing as well. You hope that Alvin Kamara comes back under Kubiak. You love Cam Jordan, but eventually all good things must come to an end. With Ramczyk, it's kind of like, ugh, man, like I don't. How much does he have left in the tank at this point? Okay, back to the tweet. The Saints are $53.5 million over the cap for 24, pending moves being finalized. You can say they can't keep getting away with it every time they restructure to save cap space, but they aren't getting away with anything. In fact, their approach keeps older players around longer and potentially past their prime while eating bunches of future cap religiously and ultimately forces a ton of dead cap down the road. And they're doing this during a time when the NFC South should be theirs for the taking. Yet they can't get in the playoffs for 3 straight years to do anything. And they've missed out on margins so slim, missed the playoffs twice with 9-8 records. It's hard to argue that a better approach to the cap would have gotten, it's hard not to argue that a better approach to the cap would have gotten them over the hump.
And also, like, the thing that we're not even talking about, like, and I agree with a lot of that. You got veteran players that are past really their peak prime, and you're still paying them like they're in that prime because you've moved it down the road so far. And I know there's a lot of people, and probably shows after us today, the cap got bigger by $30 million. They'll be fine. They're going to fit under it. They always find a way. That's what we always hear. But like when we look at the 2024 NFL free agents, you're not in on any top tier free agent because you can't afford it. Can you go sign a free agent? Maybe you can. Maybe you can get creative and find a way to bring Derek Carr to New Orleans, okay? But you're not in on any of the top free agents any given year because you don't have the ability to do so. The only free agent that you can go after is somebody that's past that peak, past their prime, and you're going to maybe overpay for that person, or you're going to get a – so when you're in free agency, there's always first wave, second wave, final wave. That's the way that our agents always tell us. Are you going to be in the first wave, the second wave, or the final wave? You don't want to be in the final wave. It means you're living year by year. Right? I've been there at the end of my career.
You might not even make the team.
You might not even get an opportunity. You might not even get a contract. The first wave is going to be the stars, right? And the guys that can help you win games right now. The second wave is going to be you're trying to fill roster spots because you don't have the cap room. And then the final wave, everybody can do that. You just take waivers on guys. Are the Saints in on any first wave free agent. And by the way, Derek Carr to me ain't a first wave free agent. He was a second wave free agent.
Yeah, that's fair.
Are they in on any of those players? No, they're not. And so why are they not on those players? Well, they can't afford those players. Like if they have a big need, which they certainly have many, certainly on the offensive front, well, they can't go just sign or even be competitive in signing the top tier free agents because they just don't have the cap space. They don't have the ability. So, yeah, they can get under the cap. They can get under the number. They can maybe sign a second wave free agent that we all know because he's been a big name before.
Yeah.
And like, hey, see who we got? But they're not in the first wave free agents because they don't have the ability to. And so how are you helping your team right now? Now you got to go draft a player. You got to go draft a Trevor Penning and hope he works out. He hasn't worked out, and now what do you have? You have a bad offensive line.
Well, and that's what else we got to factor in here. Again, this is not a clear-cut debate. It's not binary. Like, I disagree with anybody who says the Saints cap approach is wholly right or wholly wrong because there's like, okay, so he mentions being 9-8, right? Partially, that's because you did this and you maintained a pretty good nucleus of guys, right, to get you to 9. But a lot of that 8 is because you have cash strapped yourself to the point where you don't have like the 53rd, right, that the kind of the bottom of the roster that's going to push you through in some of those games. And so it kind of keeps you maybe more relevant, but it kind of also lowers your ceiling and your margin of error. And when you lower the margin of error, that then makes the draft more important. So the absolute worst thing you can do is miss as consistently on the first round picks as you did with Marcus Davenport, Peyton Turner, and Trevor Penning, like this, because he's right. When you extend, you're going to keep these veteran players potentially past their prime. You hope to offset that with the infusion of young talent through the draft. And so again, you're lowering your margin of error. And when you miss there, that's when this all starts to come to a head. If you had hit on those players, then this cap wouldn't feel nearly as bad as it does right now. But the fact that you had 3, Olave, what is that? 3 of your last 4 first-round picks then have been busts? That's not a sustainable model in the NFL if you want to be a successful franchise.
And we're not talking about he's playing, he's just not living up to first-round status. We're talking about a couple of guys that can't even get on the field.
3 guys, all 3, can't even get on the field.
Can't get on the field. Now, Olave looks like he is a star in the making, and that's great. But you can't have first-round picks that don't even touch the turf.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like 2 of the 4 you would hope would be like stars. But the others should have roles to play.
At minimum, you want a star, a solid starter, and 2 guys that contribute somehow.
Yeah.
You got 1 star and 3 inactives.
That's wild. And again, that also cannot be ignored in all of this. So the Saints cap strategy, in my opinion, and this may sound like a fence-sitting thing here, but it's not wholly good. It's not wholly bad, but it does lower the margin of error. It's kept you relevant, but it's also kept kind of a ceiling on you, and it lowers the margin of error in the draft, and they must be better in that regard if they're ever going to get this thing back. And we all know that this is kind of the come-to-a-head, make-or-break year. And if it goes awry, maybe go full reset. Only time will tell. And
another, Adam points out Isaiah Foskey in the chat. It's a great point out because that's another player you took in the second round. And T-Bob, he's not helping you on defense. No. He's not helping you on special teams. Where is a second-round pick? When you're selected in the second round, if you're not a starter, you got to be like a rotational piece. And when you come in, you are a dog. Like you're a third down guy, but when you come in, they know you're on the field. And if you're at bare minimum, if you're not that as a second-round pick, man, you got to be a core special teams guy. You got to be somebody that when they turn on the special teams tape, they're like, hey, Foskey right here, he is coming like a bat out of hell off that edge. He's none of that.
Yeah.
That's a second-round pick. And so if you don't have cap space to sign guys at the back end of your roster and you're missing on first-round picks but also second-round picks, that's where you have roster problems. Yeah. And that's where you can't get them fixed if you are 14% of your cap is paid to players that aren't playing.
Wow, just amazing black and gold takes right there, Jake.
I don't think I've ever heard any takes that are better than the 2 guys that just gave you that take.
And you can keep getting them by going ahead and liking, subscribing, ringing the bell to get notifications when we post. Have a great day. We'll see you on the next OTB Saints.